Hi, and welcome back to Psychology with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to begin to discuss the last module of this chapter over adolescence and adulthood. But today we're just going to focus on adolescence. The learning objectives we'll do today are to talk about the physical changes of adolescence, talk about the cognition and the development of morality during childhood and adolescence, talk about the role of family and friendships, and explain identity formation. So we call adolescence the period of life from the age of 13 to the early 20s. The young person is no longer a child, but they are not yet an adult. So it's a very, very strange time in a child's life, a time of storm and stress, as one German psychologist used to call it. The teens, basically they're called, you know that, from age 13 to 19. Don't confuse this with puberty. Puberty is the physical changes. Adolescence is the social changes. There's a clear age of onset when puberty happens, and then adolescence usually follows with 13 to 20. But it may come, the end may come earlier or later for different individuals, and we usually mark the end of adolescence as adopting traditional responsibilities of adulthood. The onset of puberty is the sign of the beginning of adolescence. The physical changes that happen during puberty are the primary sex characteristics and secondary sex characteristics. The primary focus on the actual growth and maturation of the sex organs themselves, and secondary are the other things that happen, like the development of body hair in different places, women, the rounding of the breasts and hips, men, testosterone starts flowing, your voice deepens, broader shoulders in men. This is the result of the master gland pretty much going haywire in your brain and sending hormones everywhere. But the psychosocial and environmental factors may impact the timing of puberty. Girls happen sooner. It takes place at around age 10 for girls and around age 12 for boys. So it's kind of humorous if you go into like a 5th or 6th grade, all the girls are a lot taller than boys because they have already started puberty and started to grow, whereas the boys, most of them have not started yet. The development of the brain does not stop at the end of the adolescent years. As you know, it continues well into the early 20s. Physical changes of puberty are relatively complete in just about 4 years. As far as the brain goes, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for impulse control, judgment, and decision making, and the organization and understanding of information. And when you are a teenager, your frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex are not fully developed. It may lead to risky behavior in adolescence, and the adolescent brain is actually a lot different from an adult brain, and since it's not fully developed, it may lead to these risky behaviors in adolescence, and we all know what you're talking about. There's been a lot of research on this in the past years, and we'll talk more about it in class, but the teenage brain is not the same as an adult brain. Cognitive development, how we think, it's less visible, but there is a change in the way adolescents think about themselves, their peers, the relationships with their peers, and the world around them. They do enter Piaget's final stage, the formal operational stage, and they develop the ability of abstract thinking, and they use that abstract thinking to search for what an ideal world is to them and how, if ever, they could achieve that and where they see themselves fitting into that ideal world. Egocentrism and introspection are two things that emerge as the personal fable and the imaginary audience. Here's two things you need to know about cognitive development. The personal fable is the teenagers have a common feeling that you don't understand me, I'm different from you. It's hard to believe, but everybody who's older than you was a teenager at one point and probably felt the same way. But when they told that to adults, they were just shrugged off. But now teenagers today, now that they are adults, they can't understand how teenagers think that way. But it is common to think that you're different from everyone else and nobody understands you. What you are going through is unique. Whereas a lot of people probably have experienced a lot of the same things as you. Not everybody goes through this. And I don't mean to trivialize anything you've been through, but some people have been through the same stuff you have. And then the imaginary audience is basically you think everybody is watching everything you're doing. And this makes you extremely self-conscious, going through a time of physical change when it's probably not the best time to have people, you think people are looking you over. But this extreme self-consciousness is known as the imaginary audience. Moral development as teenagers, we call morals the understanding of right and wrong. And a psychologist by the name of Lawrence Kohlberg comes up with a theory of the development of moral thinking. So just like Piaget did cognitive thinking, Kohlberg does a person's moral thinking by looking at how people of different ages respond to ethical dilemmas. And he proposes 3 levels of moral development. And there are some criticisms of his theory in that men and women have different perspectives on morals, and they are put into different social situations where their morals may differ. But yes, okay, here we go. Male-oriented. It's also biased towards Western cultures. And these hypothetical moral dilemmas involves asking people what they think should be done, not what they would really do when faced with a real dilemma. And so those are 2 different things. We'll talk about that when we get to social psychology. But what people say they will do and what they will actually do are 2 different things. Here's Kohlberg's 3 levels of morality. You can screenshot this if you want. I would recommend that. But the pre-conventional morality is young children, and they understand rules as the consequences determine the morality of the behavior. So if you are rewarded for a behavior, that behavior is morally good. If you are punished for a behavior, that is wrong. And an example is a child who steals a toy from another child and does not get caught would not see that behavior as incorrect. Conventional morality consists of older children, adolescents, and most adults stay in the conventional morality stage. And the conformity to social norms is what is right, and the non-conformity to social norms is wrong. So if a child criticizes his or her parent for speeding because it's against the rules and the posted speed limit, which is the law, that is an example of conventional morality. And then only about 20% of adults get to post-conventional morality, which would be the morals are determined on a person-to-person basis that may disagree with societal norms, but may fit with a more universal principle of what is right and wrong. So a reporter who writes a controversial news story would rather go to jail than reveal the source's identity. And so that's an example of post-conventional morality. Parent-teen conflict, 13.3. A certain amount of rebellion between parents and teens is normal because teens are becoming more and more independent. Parents may not be ready for that, and they may still want to treat the teenager like a child because they are having trouble adjusting to a child who is growing up into an independent adult. So this this rebellion against parents and this conflict is sort of a necessary step for the teenager to break free and become more independent. But when you break it down, most of the parent and teen conflict is over trivial issues like curfew times, hair color, clothing, taste in music, stuff like that. When we get to the bigger moral issues such as religion and politics, parents and teens are usually in agreement because the teens get those views from their parents. And as far as parents goes, there's different ways of parenting that have been identified. The relationships can be challenging during adolescence, but it also depends on the type of style that your parents use. There's authoritarian versus permissive. Authoritarian is when the parent is very strict, rigid, demands perfection. They're uncompromising. They may use physical punishment if standards are not met. And so authoritarian parents are very strict. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Permissive parenting is when the parents put very few demands on their children for behavior. And there's two types of permissive parenting. There's permissive neglectful and permissive indulgent. Permissive neglectful just means that parents aren't involved with their children. They'll ignore them and allow them to do whatever they want unless it interferes with what the parent wants. So they're just not involved with their kids' lives at all. And then permissive indulgent is when the parent allows their child basically to do whatever they want, and they seem to be too involved with their children. There is one other thing that is not on here, and that is authoritative parenting. And authoritative parenting is when a parent sets rules for their child, but they explain the reasoning behind those rules and may even let the child help determine the rule as far as it goes. So they may let the child give their opinion on what they think is an appropriate curfew time, and then maybe the parent will set it at that point and give reasoning behind it and say if you break it, it will go back to earlier curfew time. Okay, and finally we get to Erikson's the fifth stage in its identity versus role confusion. And a teenager basically is in this stage of life, their main goal of adolescence is to develop an identity, according to Erikson. They need to find their values in life and beliefs in things like politics, careers, marriage, relationships with other people. Successful teens will end up forming an identity and stay true to themselves. And a successful teen is more likely to be someone who has resolved the conflicts of the four earlier stages in Erikson's hierarchy, and they will resist peer pressure. Unsuccessful teens who have not solved those conflicts will come into adolescence with a lack of trust, feelings of guilt and shame, low self-esteem, and dependency on others. And they will also, if they don't resolve this conflict during their adolescence, they will have role confusion at the end of it, which means that they will be unsure of who they are, unsure of who to be in certain situations, and basically not be well adjusted to society. That is all I have for you today. This is the beginning of 13.5. So